All right. Good evening, everyone. You're all welcome to the 116th Power Dialogue. And our theme before us is Power and Productivity, How Energy Cost Exposes Power Sector Gaps. And we have a very, very delightful panel with us today. And I'm sure we're going to really leave here with a broadening and insight on what is really happening in Nigeria as regarding power and productivity. I will introduce myself first as the moderator, and then please, I would like every other person on the panel to just give, a short overview, name, and what you're doing in the sector and how it relates to the topic before us today. So, my name is Sokoyebom Alabi. Feel free to call me Yebom. Yes. An energy and policy research consultant with Nextia. My background has been in power distribution with the Ikeja Electric and commercial and industrial renewable solar with Westar Solar and also FMCGs. So I'm glad to be here.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
My name is Basil Abia. I'm the co-founder, chief research officer at Truva Intelligence. Truva Intelligence is a research, advisory, and data intelligence company. We work with FMCGs in northern Nigeria. We work with senior public offices in Abuja, and we're also working with renewable energy companies and media companies. The core of our work is basically to optimize business processes, provide data intelligence, and just basically make things happen using the data that we have both in-house and out of the house. That's my end.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Basil. I was enjoying that introduction so much. Hello, my name is Achenyo Alpha. I am program coordinator with Husk Power Systems. I also manage compliance. We are an AI-enabled distributed energy resource company. And basically, our mandate is to ensure that we provide energy to underserved and unserved communities. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Excellent. Greetings. It's a pleasure to join this 116th Power Dialogue. Every time I have the opportunity to be on this stage, to join industry colleagues, friends who are listening at home, and those who also join us in person, it's always an opportunity to learn, to hear how we are trying to work this sector and how we are contributing our quota to make it a better place. My name is David Arenze. I'm a renewable energy specialist. I like to say that I'm just that guy that like to see the lights on. So, here, I'm happy to serve as the lead of the Renewable Energy Thematic Working Group at the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. NESG, for short, is the foremost policy think tank in the country that has existed for over 3 decades, where we have worked tremendously within the power sector and other relevant government agencies to help facilitate policy reforms, drive innovation, and also ensure that we have a country that we are proud of through different key technical assistance roles, advocacy roles, and a couple other dialogues that we have facilitated over the years. It's a pleasure to join colleagues this evening, and I look forward to a very fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Once again, you're welcome to this Power Dialogue, the 116th. And, it's a very interesting times that we are in with the recent hike in electricity cost. I mean, I've bought fuel at different prices in 2 weeks. It just keeps going up, down at different rates. And, that has translated into the cost of production for electricity. And we have seen where a lot of the captive generation has increased and is still increasing. As at 2024, where the grid kind of improved, they attributed it to the fact that a lot of companies have left the grid. And so there is less imbalance as a result of, induction. But that's the effect that captive generation has caused in our grid today. Now, my first question will go to Basil. Given the recent spikes in electricity and fuel prices, what do you see as the long-term implications for Nigeria's economic growth?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's without a doubt that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the violence in the Middle East, particularly the violence meted on both sides from US, Israel, and Iran, is contributing to this spike in energy prices. But I must say this is not a temporary price shock. This is a structural imbalance, very important structural imbalance that Nigeria has to see as an opportunity to correct the vulnerabilities that are showing. And the vulnerabilities are very clear. The grid is insufficient for our energy needs, as we're seeing, but the alternatives are super expensive, almost to a point where Nigerians cannot even access them, and now we're looking at solar adoption now becoming a pivotal pathway. It's no longer an option or just an ideological pathway. It's now a necessity. And if you listen to traders in Aba, traders in Lagos, especially Computer Village, there are now anecdotes of people saying every day they're seeing, I've forgotten the colloquial Nigerian name for them, but these young men who earn a living by taking things using the wheelbarrows. Yeah, I don't want to use the prejudice, the ethnic prejudice name for that, but basically these men that's what they do now every day. They just take solar panels and go so that there's installation. So what are the long-term implications for this? Let us have some context. In the last month, since February 28th, we have seen Brent crude increase by 55%. In the context of Nigeria's energy price environment, we've seen an 83% increase in energy price across board. I'm talking LPG, I'm talking premium motor spirit, I'm talking agro, which is diesel, just name it. And with that increase, there's always a rule of thumb for policy analysts and economists, is now conventional, that for every 10% rise in retail PMS price or retail gas prices, there is a 0.8% addition to your inflation environment and a 0.15% reduction in your GDP growth outlook yearly. This is the case for developed countries. This is the case for developing countries. So now, if I contextualize that with the Nigerian situation, and I'm trying to analyze what the implications are, the first long-term implication is that we're going to have a very inflationary curve, a steep inflationary curve. We all know that we have had, at least the last 2 years, we've had a disinflation curve in that sense. We've had a steep reduction in headline inflation rates for the first time since...
I like the headline word.
Yes, headline inflation. For the first time since the PDP days. And sorry, I'm going political because I'm now political. I'm no longer a policy analyst alone. I'm also a politician and an aspirant. So for the first time since the PDP days, we saw food inflation rates reduced to single digit. Understand this. It's very important to contextualize this. And so what I mean by this is that we are no longer going to see those disinflation trends for the next 1, 2, 3 years because of this transmission. And where is it going? Now, there is a direct swift transmission of this energy fuel price hikes to our transportation prices. It's the swiftest. And I would like all of us to recollect our attention to when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu took over power. His first speech when he took over power was subsidy is removed. And you all know anecdotally what happened when you went to the pump stations. Everybody, rushed out to get their last fuel levels at 189 naira per liter. And then that became 600, that became 700. It's now 1,300. Depending on what part of Nigeria you're at, 1,500 per liter. So again, the first long-term implication of that is the high price inflationary crisis. In fact, we at Truva Intelligence are projecting at least 1.5% addition to whatever outlook you're looking at for inflation in Nigeria. So if your best case scenario outlook for headline inflation for Nigeria for 2026 is 15%, make that 16.5%, because this particular price environment caused by this exogenous shock is going to stake those numbers high. The second one is what I call compressed household income. Now, the compressed household income already started since last year. According to PwC, we had a contraction of 5% in household consumption. Now, this is obviously the effect of the neoliberalization reforms that started from May 2023 till date. all of that transmission caused a contraction of household consumption. I think that goes on to 2027. I even think it will go into 2028 as well. Now, the other additional thing is that the fiscal revenues increase. We can't just look at all of the bad effects or bad long-term implications of this new price environment. I think there will be the good ones, and elevated fiscal revenues is one of them. And it's because those are what the numbers are. Right now, the benchmark for our budget, the benchmark rate for our budget is $65 per barrel, right? What is the current Brent crude price globally? 106. Yesterday, it was 107. Day before yesterday, it was $117 per barrel. So if you're looking at that, that's an average of 70% increase beyond your benchmark rate. So if you were supposed to take in 1 trillion naira monthly from your Brent crude exports, you're now taking in 2.47 trillion. Now, obviously, we know that that's not going to come in fully to our buffers, because we have at least 14.6% of our yearly revenues being used to service our debt that we use crude to offset. Aside from that, we have to take care of other external capital expenditure projects that will need numbers. We have our recurrent budget numbers. So the positive of this long-term implication, obviously, is that fiscal revenues get heightened. The negatives are, again, the inflationary spike and the contraction of household consumption.
Yeah, I like that response. And I'll take it from there, with the reduced household consumption rate. And, there is research that 62% of Nigerians are at the risk of poverty. And I'll pose this next question to David Arinze. You always like to see the light on. So when you are seeing households now more of the household having a reduced income, how can they transition? Because, Basil mentioned solar becoming an option, but the cost of solar is not affordable. So it means we are regressing on our energy assets. So how can, Nigeria better integrate these options of off-grid and on-grid into, improving our energy in Nigeria?
Thank you so much for the question. And, sometimes we tend to treat off-grid as a different model, on-grid as a different model, and as if there are two parallels that never meet. But I would like to say that off-grid and on-grid energy tend to complement each other. Sometimes you find yourself, when it comes to help and to keeping the lights on and ensuring that people have access to the electricity that they need. Having access to electricity is not just for the fun of it. It powers life. It powers livelihoods. It helps improve service delivery. It helps improve across different sectors, from health to education, healthcare, you name it. So when we don't have access to electricity, we're literally saying we're putting a pause on productivity. Because in itself, as an enabler, it has a ripple effect on many other things. When you don't have access to electricity, I don't know how many of us, let me just bring it home, because I know that some of the people that are listening to the dialogue today are those who are just regular, everyday Nigerians who may not even understand the jargons we speak in the Nigerian electricity supply industry. But I don't know any of us in the room who or listening online have gone somewhere to print a document, maybe a 2-page, 3-page document. And, there was maybe, you typically would print that a page at 100 naira or 200 naira. I tell you, we'll go on general. And that same document you print at 100, 200 naira becomes 500 naira, 600 naira. I'm sure I have some weaknesses. Something as straightforward as barbing your hair or trying to carry out any of these services, maybe you get a haircut typically at 1,000 or 2,000 naira, but you go to that same salon, because of they having to power their genset to meet your demands, then it increases the price sometimes by 2.5x, sometimes by 2x. What does that mean? We have clearly seen the impact of increased of the lack of electricity from the grid, also creating some sort of hike in prices, and not necessarily that the capacity of people to pay is increasing. So we have a clear-cut challenge. Now, how are we able to address some of these things? because is solar really an option? Is clean energy really or is off-grid energy really an option? And I'll say that we need to get our grid working, right? But sometimes it's important for us to also prioritize. When we think about energy as a service, we need to look at it from a point where sometimes you prioritize where clean alternative energy is able to give you that short, medium-term impact. Because in itself, keeping the lights on means improving productivity, means improving service delivery. Now, the question is, are people able to afford it? When we talk about the issue of cost, I'm very careful on what we mean by can people afford it? Because are we saying that the equipment in itself is obtaining the equipment in itself is the real challenge, or the cost of obtaining that equipment is the real challenge, or the flexibility around it? Now, a lot of us, people that run gensets, to say, oh, it's nothing. You go to 10,000, 20,000 naira, you burn it. The next day you go again. Unlike a typical solution that if you had, let's say, a 1.5 kVA generator and you wanted to get something similar, for the generator set, it's cheaper than the solar alternative. What you have prevalent in the market today is that a lot of people, you are saddled with the responsibility of owning that asset in one sweep. But it's not necessarily more expensive than the other alternative. It's just that the payment models around it makes that owning that device much more expensive at that initial stage. Because once you have this device powered on, you don't have to deal with very minimal cost of maintenance and operations. And as far as the system is rightly designed, it's effectively working, it's able to give you years of meaningful service as far as you don't compromise its standard working conditions. But that's what you have. So I wouldn't say that it's a grid over an all-green thing. It's just being able to ensure that what solutions do we need to prioritize to meet the demand in the medium short term, while we think of more long-term alternatives. That's one. Two, what are the models we have for people for rapid adoption of these solutions? Because again, I keep on saying this, I'm sure that I already sound like a broken record, but we cannot continue to rely solely on the importation of these equipments in the country and expect that the prices will draw down. It's not going to work. In fact, there's the news going now that solar equipments globally, due to some things that are being planned in Asia, I think specifically in China, that prices will increase by up to 9%. You know, I'm still yet to verify that, but again, you can see what that powerhouse of China and the impact on global sales of renewable. So bringing it back home, what are we doing with our cobalt? What are we doing with our lithium? What are we doing with all these natural critical energy minerals that we can turn from raw materials to finished goods that would help ensure that we create jobs, help ensure that we can contribute to not just our local demands, but also a market that is within the West African market and even much more. Last year at the Nigerian Renewable Energy Innovation Forum organized by the Royal Education Agency, we were celebrating that Living LPV, yes, company had just sent their first shipment of manufactured solar panels in Nigeria to Ghana, right? And so we also look inwardly. There are some companies that are already in the business of manufacturing solar panels, the business of manufacturing batteries. These companies as of today are maxed out, yet they're employing hundreds of people. So again, I say to you, all right, whether we think of off-grid, we can have the whole off-grid versus on-grid fight, but that's not it. We need to be able to see this challenge as one that we can turn to treasure through leveraging our own local resources and putting our money in the places that matter the most. There we can now begin to say, okay, we are actually, because when you now do this, two things happen. One, investors come in and say, okay, this is the sector that I can put in some money in. And of course, it helps really, once we have capital inflows going there, guess what? a lot more resources would naturally flow. Because today we keep on asking ourselves, how come we don't have a lot of commercial banks playing in this space? How come we don't have a lot of activities around manufacturing? We can. The only thing is we need to be able to set the relevant things in place, enabling environment that can make that happen. And then, who knows, we may not be talking about this. Maybe while we are having to meet our day-to-day electricity needs, we're like, okay, what can we do more sustainably that gets our grid working, that ensures that we're able to get electricity to the lives of those that who need it the most. And I'd like to end in this note. While we also celebrate alternative energy, all right, everybody in their rights now are power producers. So now you are an independent power producer. I'll call you producer A, producer B, producer C, producer. Because if you check well, all of us, even if we all had solar solutions running, guess what? The cost of having one solution that serves 4 of us is cheaper than having 4 independent solutions.
Yeah.
And so there are different ways that we can think about it. So whether we think of grid or off-grid, we need to really go back down and look at what are those models that enable effective, that drive down the cost while improving efficiency and service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that.
Yeah,
I hear you on the grid, ensuring that we make sure we get the grid working, which is like, the most simplest form of supply that we can have at the moment. And that's like the long-term goal that we should aim for. It's not just the on-grid or the off-grid or the flexibility that it brings. But now we're talking about manufacturing companies, right? We see a lot of them in recent years pulling out. And I'm sure it also has to do with this power cost. I mentioned the other day, even to buy drugs these days, your antibiotics that was going for as simple as 6,000, you now get it to 48,000. And then what you see, I mean, there are a lot of, it's a retrogression that is happening on. And so I'll pose my next question to Achenyo. Is this problem with the power sector, getting the grid functioning, getting the grid running, can you frame it as technical or financial or regulatory? And if it is regulatory, yeah, we will say it's to implement regulatory, right? How? What is it? What is that thing that's in the gap that we are missing?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. It's very interesting that I don't think there's any conversation right now in Nigeria that we don't mention power.
Yeah.
There must be a conversation with light or complaining about the cost of alternative energy.
Yeah.
So thank you again for the opportunity to be here. So there are technical issues.
Yes.
And then there's the problems with financing. We already know that there's a debt in the energy sector. We know it's running into trillions. We know that there's a bond. I think the NBET came out with a bond, 501 billion. I think the first tranche has been oversubscribed already from what we've read.
Yeah.
Yes. So we see that there are all of these issues, but I will come from this regulatory point that you've said, and you're right. Regulation is not our problem. If we should talk about regulations, we have a lot of regulations already. We have the Electricity Act being amended currently. We have I'm a developer, so let me come from there. We have the mini grid regulations. So when you have all of these things, beyond implementation there's implementation, there's enforcement. So take, for example, with the new Electricity Act, states now have oversight over their generation, transmission, and distribution, right?
Yeah.
States have that. So some states have already taken that mandate, not all states. Their preparedness is another concern to talk about. Then you have that there's some sort of fragmentation with the Electricity Act, as well as the regulations that states are coming up with.
Yes.
So as a developer, I'm seeing that I'm having to deal with multiple regulators, and the regulations are not the same in every instance,
Jurisdiction.
in every jurisdiction. Thank you very much for that word. So you see that there are these issues with implementing, because what works for one state A, may even conflict with the national, or should I say the national regulator.
Yeah.
So there's that part of fragmenting that the Electricity Act is trying to, the amendment is trying to correct, in that you're saying that, okay, let us clearly delineate the powers of states as regards generation, as regards transmission, as regards distribution, and let us say what NEC, that's not the regulator, what it can do, the authority it can have, because the previous one, there was some sort of lacuna that gave states that like 100% control. So that's what they're trying to do now. Then the second thing I'd say is poor coordination. For us, I think recently NEC called the SECs together and there was an engagement that they had. So there's need for a lot of hand-holding. And where we're coming from as developers, we see that this regulatory issue is wanting to put it there, but do we have confidence enough in it? And states are trying, they're trying, but there's that confusion. You have some states that have boards and then they have commissions, but they are basically sort of like doing the same thing. And you go to one board and you're trying to align with the requirements to get energy last mile. So what we do is try to get energy to those people that the grid has not gotten to them. So in trying to get there, this can be the challenges that we're facing. And I think that's one of the things that the mini grid regulations that is currently also being amended is seeking to correct and seeking to change, so that a developer like myself and investors as well will not be discouraged to go into some states in the far north or in the far south or wherever it is, and know that there's reduced capital at risk. You know that nothing is they're not exposed. So those are the things that I think are concerns with regulations, right? And what I see is that the EA, that's what we call Electricity Act, is currently being amended to reflect some of these things. The same thing with mini grid regulations right now.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Achenyo, on that. Basil, would you still like to speak to that? What?
I think she's covered it properly.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I thought your nodding was like there was still something more.
I'm enjoying listening to her. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll still, now you mentioned that, you know, with the issues that you're facing with the off-grid, having to deal with different states and all. So at what point, I know we all celebrated when the last Electricity Act came out, that all states have been given the power, so states can go ahead and do what they need for their states. We see Enugu taking the lead, having issues in the process. How do we prevent this overlap? I don't know how we can actually stop it as a nation. If you say NEC should take over, we can see how NEC has been implementing their regulations so far. You get, it has not really yielded the needed results that we want to see, especially with the DisCos, compliance with the DisCos. How do you really think it can translate into yielding the results where you have the freedom and the confidence to invest?
Okay, so you may need to take that. That was a whole lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm saying that, you know, you're talking about the issues as per states, you know, we celebrated the Electricity Act, the 2022 Electricity Act was going to give power to the state, and it was a laudable, you know, initiative, yes. So states to be able to take command of their electricity. But now that we are taking it back, and we can see how NEC has been implementing regulations. I cited the example of the DisCo compliance. How really will that solve the issue of the electricity, having, you know, confidence in investing in the electricity sector?
Okay, so for investors now who want to invest in it, in the electricity sector. So again, I have to, you know, piggyback on where I work.
No, of course, from where you work. I want it from that perspective.
Yeah. So you've raised a point that I also mentioned before, and the issue has to do with enforcement. We have the regulations, of course. We have implementation can be a bit of an issue. And then we also have the part for enforcement. I won't go somewhere where I'm not sure that the regulations are not followed to a T.
Yes.
Yes, if I don't have confidence in that, then I would be reluctant. Like David alluded to the fact that investors are not as keen to invest in here because there's all sorts of things that are going on here that are not, straightforward to them. And speaking in layman's language, I'm not technical like
Yes.
this gentleman on both sides, So where I would come from with that is clear communication, clear coordination. I like the fact, again, I'm going back to this current Electricity Act being amended. We're already in a decentralized market. That should be a plus for all of us.
Yes.
Being in a decentralized market. However, some states, in my opinion, may not be ready. And that's why we still have, NEC, hand-holding some of those states. And for those that already have those commissions like in place, you also have NEC trying to, support them. And that's what the EA, again, Electricity Act, is trying to help, to give us that confidence that there are certain things, oversights, with regards to maybe transmission that has to do with another state, that an investor can be confident in, knowing that there is a supreme, like there is an authority that is constantly, that has that power. Initially, I wouldn't say NEC really had that for certain states. States were making their regulations, states were, creating their boards, states where some, of course, involved NEC in the entire process. But if you look at it, some of the regulations in one state, and I don't want to call the states here, some of the regulations in one state is completely different with regards to how we get our permits, with regards to how we get to a community, with regards to how we get to a site. So what this EA is now trying to do is also involve, like the EA will cover embedded generation, captive generation, interconnected mini grids, and these are the things that are, going on. The DES program too is another way that it's sort of like de-risking for investors, right? So you have a program that it covers like energy access. You're trying to bridge and provide energy to over 17.5 million Nigerians. That's a lot. And then you have that guarantee that for accessing or providing power to this community or to a community that has, that is underserved, that's the interconnected mini grid part, you know that you're going to get your money back, at least to a great, extent. So that is encouraging for investors. If you've been reading and you've been looking at the DES program, you'll see that a lot of both Nigerians and foreign companies have been investing and have been doing the work, trying to, get energy last mile.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much on that. Basil, I have a question as regards your perspective. I just want to get your perspective of where the highest bottlenecks are. Is it generation? Is it transmission? Is it distribution? And I ask this question because we see generation, payment is an issue, transmission capacity is not up to, distribution, we're not collecting the money, but where really is the biggest bottleneck, and how can a data-driven solution help address them?
Firstly, that's a very complex question, and it deserves all of the complexity to answer that it deserves. So I'm going to try and do that in a very short time. There is no one singular bottleneck that is bigger than another. In policy analysis, especially when I was very young, when I was in my early 20s, we're taught that the best way to find solutions is to explain the problems properly, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do that. So since we have three sections to that particular sector, the electricity supply industry itself, we have generation, we have transmission, and then what's the last one?
Distribution.
I highlight what the bottlenecks are, and then what data-driven solutions can be applied to them. So for generation, we already know that supply constraints are there. And supply constraints are divided into two parts. First part is that the supply source itself is not a problem. Yes, you can read out all the stats about our reserves, can read out all the stats about our gas, what do you call that? The gas flaring. The last that I checked, Nigeria flares about 7.7 billion cubic meters of gas. I was supervising field work in Southern Akwa Ibom. I'm from Southern Akwa Ibom, by the way, particularly in Akwa Ibom, very close to the Mobile jetty there. And I counted up to 3 different gas flaring sites. And that's an incredibly energy poor area. There's a lot of electricity supply deficits in the villages close by. My village is also close by. We've not had electricity for over 2 years. My own village, but look at the gas flaring where you can tap. So for generation, supply constraints come from the gas source issue itself. It also comes from the gas infrastructure issue. What I mean by this is that pipeline vandalism is still bedeviling that section, right? And that's why the last 2 months we've actually struggled in terms of on-grid electricity, because the general consensus has been GenCos have been suffering due to this gas supply constraints. There is also the commercial part of the GenCo bottleneck. And the commercial part is simple as this, and I highlight it from consumers to discos, then to the GenCos itself, to the gas suppliers. So consumers are not paying their fair worth of the electricity that they're consuming. 1. 2, they don't even have access to the pipelines to pay because they're still billed using estimated billing. At least if you look at the numbers of our aggregated technical, commercial, and collection losses, it's still, on average, still above 50%, right? Kaduna Disco did the first quarter last year. Kaduna Disco did 68% A, T, C, and C losses. That's huge. That basically means that they're not collecting what they're wheeling out, right? And you can see how that cascades to the entire level. So if you have the ATC and C losses at incredible record levels, what's happening to the discos? Discos are struggling. Discos cannot pay the GenCos. What happens to the GenCos? They are struggling. They cannot pay for gas. So gas suppliers are illiquid. Where's the incentive for a gas supplier to continue to supply gas at a heightened international gas price? Because the cost of evacuating that gas, from the source is high. There's also the geopolitical premium now because of the Iran war. There is now the pipeline vandalism issue. We also have the gas source issue where sometimes those gas fields, are filled with a lot of water. That's the issue. And I'm just talking about the thermal plants, where the ATC and C losses are prevalent. Then I now move to the HEP segment of the GenCos. We all know, and since I was a child, I always know that we'll struggle with electricity the moment it is October. From October, I can't believe this. Since I was a kid, and I'm supposed to have 2 kids by now, but we still have the same problems. We have to wait till May before electricity supply increases. And I'm wondering, what sort of civilization is this? We still haven't solved that same problem, But the hydrological instability is a huge concern for our HEPs, right? Mainstream Energy are probably the largest players in that sector. There's also a second part to that. Infrastructure, the plant infrastructure. They're using 1960s, 1970s technology. They're using 1970s Chinese technology. China has moved past that technology to date. They need to update those plants. And that's why even the plant, even when there's enough water, we're not doing maximum capacity utilization. So for Kainji Dam, which is probably the most popular power plant in Nigeria's history, it's supposed to do, if I'm not mistaken, 780 megawatts, but at peak capacity, it struggles between 400 to 500. Look at those losses that we're incurring because of the hydrological instability. So I think I've done a good job at highlighting the bottlenecks, GenCos. Now, what are the solutions? For gas, and again, there are no silver bullets. Please understand that you have to cascade all of them together. It has to be a multi-pronged approach. Private sector and the public sector need to have, like she mentioned, it has to be clear communication, clear coordination, so that we start to see the benefits of that policy response. So the first policy response will be, we need a lot of data infrastructure in place. Data infrastructure to be able to track the feedstock supply visibility. So we're able to preempt when there is a pipeline vandalism act in Delta State or offshore. when in colloquial Nigerian lingo, especially with big boys, they call it tapping. And I say this because I've actually spoken with a number of bunkerists in the last 1 month. Not by my doing. Like I said, I'm a politician, so I actually sit and I come from a oil and gas area, and I was speaking with some party members, and they've told me that their former jobs, they were actually oil and gas tappers. I'm telling you this for a fact. So from field experience, I'm already saying, okay, these are the structural issues we have to fix. But yeah, there's a lot of gas tapping. We need to be able to know when that happens so that we're able to preempt. We also need to have redundancy systems. That's very important for those in the technicals. Part of energy, you know what I mean by redundancy system. We don't have the infrastructure for redundancy.
Yeah.
So it means that whenever there is a shortage somewhere, the entire grid collapses because of that small shortage, because we don't have redundancy supply and we can't track, right? There's also, again, like I mentioned, the need to improve the technology that the HEPs use. That will need to come with some liquidity inflow. That liquidity inflow will have to be driven by the markets, the private sector, but there will need to be governance in terms of policy offsets for that to be able to happen. Now we move to transmission. We already know what the core bottleneck for transmission is. We don't have the capacity for the level of power that we can generate. And the data shows that we can generate as high as 7,000 megawatts. The peak generation last year was 6,008 megawatts, if I'm not mistaken, March 2025. But once you start to hit that peak, our wheeling capacity, which in layman terms is just the ability to convey power from one source to another source, it just collapses. Again, aging infrastructure. We're using 1970s and 1980s technology. We need to improve at that. We also have insufficient transmission nodes, or what I call transformers. The network infrastructure is obsolete. There's not a lot of SCADA. There's not widespread SCADA for data records. So you're not able to carry out predictive analysis, find out where the faults are. There are mechanic issues. We have aging 330 kVA lines everywhere. I don't know what's happening with the Siemens, I think 25,000 megawatts plan. The plan was by December 2025, Siemens the plan between the presidential initiative for power and Siemens would be that by December 2025 would have 25,000 megawatts added, and the transmission and wheeling capacity infrastructure to be able to convey that. I know that has now been reviewed. I don't know what the new milestones are, but those are the bottlenecks for transmission. The infrastructure is just not there. How do we solve that problem? Again, we need a lot of liquidity inflow to modernize the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
We need widespread equitable SCADA systems. And I actually think personally that there needs to be a centralized database for commercial and policy purposes, where all the players in the NESA, what I mean by NESA is the Nigerian electricity supply industry, all the players are able to distribute the data real time as they're getting it and access data from other MDAs and other regulators when they need it. And so that analysts like myself can also look at the data in real time and understand, because at the end of the day, what you don't know, you cannot solve. So we need to know so that we're able to reel out solutions. So a centralized database, which is a general Nigerian problem, by the way. Up to now, we don't have a centralized criminal database in our police systems. So you can see it's a general problem elsewhere. We don't have the data pipeline. So probably
like transparency.
it's a design, by the way. It's a design. And I think once we're able to realign the incentives governance-wise, we will start to see investments in open transparency. Shout out to Budget. They do a good job in that regard. I think NEC also, their website has been very helpful. Their quarterly reports have been very helpful to my work. Shout out, you guys save me all the time, NEC. Solid work. Dr. Oseni, fantastic work. But those are the solutions for the bottlenecks in transmission. And then I come into the distribution end. ATC and C is the biggest issue. That's where the discos are suffering. Kaduna Disco, Yola Disco. I'm from Yola as well. I was born in Mubi, grew up in Yola. So I know that Yola Disco is probably the worst performing disco, and I'm not putting them in place. It's just the truth. It's so bad. So bad. I had to move my mother off grid 2 years ago because the performance was just so bad. You can stay for 2 weeks and you only have a blink of light, maybe max 2 hours collectively. It's so bad. And in terms of collections too, they're really bad, you know. I'm surprised Kaduna beat them to being terrible. But the core problem for discos are, again, like I mentioned, the aggregated technical, commercial and collection losses. And this can be offset by one thing and one thing alone: widespread meterization. I don't know why we love the gallery when we bring a solution. For the last 10 years, I've been listening to the federal government in Nigeria talk about metering. A number of organizations, some of you have worked for them before, have used it to eat European Union money and push for advocacy for mass metering. Up to now, we're still there. 80 C&C losses are still above 50% on average. So I don't know what the problem is. Is there a supply problem? Supply problem should have been solved 5 years ago when President Buhari, mass distributed licenses to as many metering,
meter asset providers,
assembly companies. In fact, I even went to a factory in Iduye that was supposed to be producing that last year, and I saw nothing. But they raised money due to these initiatives. What's happening? I really don't know what's wrong. But the solution for that is just mass metering. If you mass meter, a significant amount of those ATC and C losses significantly reduced. Those are my data-driven solutions, as far as I could say. If we're able to do that, we're able to have real-time tracking of the systemic faults. You're able to see the thieves, the energy thieves, because you have smart meters all across board, and you're able to apprehend. And I think now, if I'm not mistaken, there are now punitive measures for when you steal electricity, right? If I'm not mistaken, is 14 years in prison? Or 4 years?
No, maybe with the new one.
Yeah, the new one. I was in this particular dialogue 2 years ago when a former boss of mine, I won't mention him, was asking for death penalty for energy thieves or electricity thieves. I won't mention his name, but I worked with him for 1 year. So yeah, these are my solutions.
Yeah. Honestly, we need to do more about the penalty for debt, because a lot of the issues we talk about metering, right? For me, I see also an angle. Once while in the disco, we metered the feeder, right? The feeder at some point, immediately we metered, the consumption dropped. And as the consumption dropped, the losses spiked. So it's the same, the commercial losses spiked because you have different people developing new and profound methods.
How smart are the meters?
It was EMI meters, but
are they the smartest in the market?
Yeah, it was smartest in the market at that time.
Okay.
Now it was not theft that occurred as just bypassing the meter. They would just literally draw a fresh line from the pole. So all they do is you cuff your cable and just hang it at night.
Ooh.
Good.
So it's not they don't need to touch their meters. So you see, our problem is more.
I won't say that's just with the whole smart meter thing. And again, I'm not so technical, but we try to thrive on AI basically, and then we have smart meters, and some of these places are the communities we reach out to. They're in places that you may have to take a boat, and then when you take a boat, you have to take a bike, for instance, for maybe like
2 hours.
for 2 hours
Yeah.
to get to that location.
Yeah.
So how do you manage the energy? How do you observe it? How do you look at it?
Effectively
it?
monitor.
Answer that before you go ahead to finish answering. I want to make a note that based on our analysis, we discovered that it was the people that could afford that stole more.
Crazy.
Just before you go, I forgot to add another big problem with the illiquidity in the entire value chain of the electricity supply industry is the government itself. I don't know what they were doing with that haircut where they reviewed the losses to 2 trillion and you're going to pay. Don't know how that works. Because again, if you say you want a market reflective industry, it should reflect.
Yes.
And as far as I know, for over 250 years of capitalism, liquidity is going to respond to where liquidity is going. It's as simple as that. So if out of 6 trillion, you're telling the industry players that you're only going to give them 2 trillion, and then you have one haphazard 500 billion bond elsewhere. Where are you going to take care of the remaining 3 trillion? Who's going to take care of that? You know, so the liquidity issue is based on that market governance structure that even a grid management company that they just set up is not going to stop. And I assure you, while we have scarce resources and our fiscal revenues are improving now, thank God, but still scarce, the government has to be able to prioritize where they send capital to. And I'm sorry I'm sounding political, but there was no need for us to embark on the coastal highway when we had these illiquidity issues. It's in economics, it's very simple. Opportunity cost, preferential table, preferential order. What will solve Nigeria's problem if you solve certain bottlenecks in 3-4 years? The president had to just decide, look, I want to solve power first. And if we had solved that, in fact, this discussion will not happen.
We will not have it. Yeah.
Because we would have been insulated to an extent to the exogenous shocks caused by the Strait of Hormuz closure. But here we are talking about this because everybody is exposed. The NESI is exposed because we decided we're going to just spend 13 trillion on a highway. Don't get me wrong, highways are very important for GDP upgrades, very important for wholesale economic development. But in a situation of scarce resources, you prioritize. And I think up till date, it's not a silver bullet, don't get me wrong, but one of the easiest ways to swing Nigeria into productivity, increase productivity, is to invest in our electricity sector, or power sector. Once you are able to do that, if you put 6 trillion of the 13 trillion for the coastal highway into solving these illiquidity issues and allow the cost reflective mechanisms that we were carrying, gradual phasing out, I'm very sure it would have been in a different picture by now, but that's another matter for another day.
I agree with you, honestly. David, I don't know, I've been enjoying this conversation so far. I hope we're priming up to, get involved in the conversations that we have been having, our audiences online and physical. Okay, so David, let's also talk about what diesel prices is. Rising businesses are under pressure. Many people are migrating to energy as a service instead of staying on the grid. Hybrid energy systems are gaining traction, right? So in practical terms, how well do this system perform in Nigeria's operating environment? And what are the hidden limitations stakeholders often overlook?
Thank you so much for this question. Sometimes when the kind of situation we find ourselves as really needing to meet our energy needs or electricity needs at all costs, we find ourselves leveraging hybrid solutions, especially because in areas where the grid is not working optimally. Again, even if the grid works optimally, there are some places where I tell you it doesn't make sense to extend the grid to, right? So I call it use what solution works best when it makes economic sense. Because energy is a business and it must always be paid for. So some places grid will work, in some places it only just makes more sense to use distributed solutions or hybrid solutions. Now, speaking about these systems in themselves, you have the cost situation to think about, as well as other underlying factors that ensure that they can work and deliver effectively. And when you think about these hybrid solutions, for example, when you're deploying solar solutions, you think of battery solutions, think of solar PV itself, inverter equipment, and whatnot. And before the solutions are deployed, relevant energy audits are done, system sizing is done. Also, you ensure that as a result of all of these activities that need to be undertaken, you do that so that these systems will not fail. And earlier in my intervention, I talked about if used rightly, because sometimes people deploy solutions and they tend to overlabor these equipment, right? Yeah. And so even developers now are getting smarter by putting limiters. I'll tell you that in the earlier days that we had mini grid solutions being deployed, people could just use electrons as they like. But developers discovered that, hey, from our checks, this particular customer is supposed to use more than 500 kilowatt, 500 watts per hour. And some of them are drawing up to 3 kilowatts by virtue of several things can contribute to that. Inefficient equipment, right? Sometimes you're not supposed to be using some type of equipment. And sometimes you even have these solutions being deployed when a proper rewiring has not been done. So you just deploy a solution without doing relevant electrical checks, and you get to see that there's a lot of feedback in the system that compromises the system. So I would say that as I attempt to answer this question, brilliant question, I must say, we must be able to look at these systems and say, how are they designed? At what cost do they come? What are those necessary checks that need to be done before these systems are even being deployed? Energy audit. Is there some sort of rewiring that needs to be done? Is there some sort of checks, technical checks that need to be done before they are deployed? I think it's important that we look at that. Also, looking at from the subject of energy efficiency, I would say that it's also important to start considering even the equipment that these systems are going to power, how energy efficient are they? Sometimes you may need to just recommend replacement. And actually, yes, because some of these equipments are getting more efficient by the day. OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, are being saddled with the responsibility to see how can we achieve more use with less consumption of electricity, or more service with less consumption of electricity, and that is what is we literally have in the market today. So from our heavy appliances like typical pressing irons, water for heating or for cooling, depending on what gadget you're talking about, it's important for us to be able to look at how these systems are being sized and how efficient these things are. The fact that you are consuming a lot of electrons doesn't mean that you're getting the best service. It may just mean that you may need to it may just mean that you may need to change some of your equipment. Even back home, even if you're using the grid, at the end of the day, and that's what brings brings you with two things. One, the guy that is providing electricity for you wants you to consume as much as you can consume. But on the other hand, you see that while we want you to consume effectively, you also need to consume smartly and responsibly. On the issue around some of the bottlenecks, right? I would say that, and I'll link it to these hybrid systems today. A lot of times we say that there's a lot of ATC&C losses. On the other hand, energy theft.
Yeah.
You see, one thing I can tell you is people want to pay a reflection of their consumption. Most times where you see, apart from those who just love the business of stealing, if you are not in the business of stealing electricity or just taking a due advantage, you want to pay for a service you are getting. Most of the times what we have within the space is that people get bills that are not a reflection of what they have consumed. So in order to ensure that they, hedge against such impartiality, they just go rogue. But I tell you that in order for people in order for you to get the best out of people, you need to ensure that people pay consumption reflective tariffs. And even when it comes to hybrid solutions, today we have companies today that deploy these solutions and install a smart meter. And you just pay as you use. You don't get to own the assets. It serves you. You agree to a tariff. You know that you can read your meter any day, anytime. You know that from the comfort of your office, I forgot to turn off my AC. With some smart solutions, you can easily turn that AC off to reduce your consumption. Why? Because again, we need to see how we use electricity and look at how our daily lives in tandem with how we use electricity. Back in the day, there was not a lot of conversation. Some decades ago, there was not a lot of conversation about energy efficiency. In fact, sometimes you leave your AC on and go out and come so that you say like, so when I get back, the room is very solid, and it's just the right temperature for me to sleep and lounge. But as conversations are going about reuse, recycle, how do we ensure around energy efficiency, you begin to see the need for us to be able to ensure that we re-educate people on the fact that you kept your AC running for 3 hours does not mean that the thermostat there is sleeping. Once the thing gets to a point, it cuts off electricity. And so there's no point keeping it running when you know that within a few minutes of powering this device on, if it's an energy efficient device, it gives you the service that you need. So I would say that some of these things are in terms of identifying what are some of those things that stakeholders usually take for granted. One, there's that customer education that needs to happen over how do we live our lives in relation to access to electricity. A lot of education needs to go around that. Again, what are those financial mechanisms that exist for people to make the most use of electricity? Thirdly, what are those energy efficient equipments that are there that enable you to get the same value but at a reduced cost, both cost on your electricity consumption and also costs on other environmental factors, like such as how do you ensure that because of the fact that you're not having to use other sorts of alternative solutions, you're even able to breathe cleaner air, you're able to have better solutions, you're even live a more comfortable life. And I'd like to say that as well, when it comes to hybrid solutions, we need to understand finally that these solutions in themselves have a lifespan. So they get to an end life, and we need to be conscious of the fact that when these equipments get to their end life, what are the plans we have for responsible disposal? We're all very happy today about renewable energy equipment. You mentioned earlier, Basil, the fact that some executive waste pickers are picking up trash, and sometimes you ask yourself, why are they even dumping this trash? How are they even recycling this trash? We've had situations where batteries, for example, wrong recycling of batteries have led to soil pollution. They have even led to the loss of life and other sort of very detrimental issues on the health side. So while I keep on saying, when I look at the subject of renewable energy and even some of these things, ethical, responsible disposal is also something we must be thinking about right from the point of deployment. Because after a couple of years, the panels are out. After a couple of years, the batteries are out. After a couple of years, the technology needs some sort of upgrade or revamp. Where do these equipment finally end up? In our landfills? Hopefully not. Again, I must applaud the government, on the other hand, that has taken the initiative to start that has set in motion what we call the off-grid renewable energy equipment waste policy that ensures that PROs, developers, relevant stakeholders, including government, can all shake hands and ensure that they agree on effective and responsible waste disposal. Because whether we like it or not, it's something we'll have to deal with at some point. We're excited about the solutions across the country. In fact, right now, the slang is I solar pass my neighbor, which is fine. But at some point, we would literally need to start thinking, where did these equipments end up? So these are some of the things that I think that stakeholders must put at the front and center as we try to use these solutions to meet our short, medium term goals. Yeah. Thank you
very much for that, David. That's really insightful, and there are really things that have been overlooked. And I wonder, because by default, when you have meters installed, you will tell yourself to reduce your power. And I know that it might be a struggle for a lot of people now to go efficient. We're still back on this cost thing. How do we hedge it up for Nigerians? This is an open question to anybody that wants to answer. How do we hedge up this issue of, reducing your own natural cost through efficiency? How do we hedge up the ability for people to transit?
There are several ways. Allow me to jump in, but there are several ways that we can hedge the cost. Some years back, there was a lot of clamor that we should remove the import duties that come with importing solar equipment into the country, that in itself would increase the adoption of the technology. It has its own benefits because, again, when you remove 10% of the landing cost for this equipment, when you quantify that, you know that it has a very huge impact on the final cost that the end user tends to pay for the solution. Well, I would say that while government has its own role to play as creating an enabling environment through policy, through some sort of cost rebates for a period of time, when it comes to especially the importation of this equipment, we must be able to also set clear priorities and quantify what that impact is, right? So if we're saying for either for cooling, for heating, or whatever sort of equipment, we're saying that we want to drive down the cost. Government, on one hand, can take the step, but does it mean that the importer and the salesperson would also effect that rebate?
Actually.
Because it may just be more money, more margins for those who are doing the business. And so we must be able to engage and have strict measures in place that ensures that if government is taking this action to create an enabling environment for this through relevant policies in place, possible, you don't have to source FX through very expensive means, but you can get it through some government-friendly, cost-friendly means. Government is playing their part. We must be able to ensure that those who are playing in that sector are also effecting those rebates.
Yeah.
Then we're sure that, okay, when it gets through the value chain, there's a reduction in price, right? And also and effective monitoring to ensure that to see how that translates. I would also say that it's also important for us to be sincere with ourselves, right? Because sometimes government will go ahead to take certain action, but stakeholders in the sector will just leverage it. I mean, the typical business now is trying to look at the best way to leverage the market share, right? And so, but it's important that we're able to do that, effectively. Another thing that is also very critical, talking about the cost thing, is also how can we support local manufacturing? Nigeria is a very amazing market. Today, Nigeria is on the path of being the third most populous country in the world by 2050, right? And it is pegged at 450 million people based on the data. That's an incredible market for any meaningful business venture. It is. So we need to ask ourselves, government, let's think long-term, let's think future. A majority of this population are also young people. We need jobs for these young people. We need them to live improved lives and livelihoods. We need to also ensure that there's improved healthcare, there's improved services that improve generally, that ensure that these Nigerians are able to live meaningful lives. Now, the question is, are we making the right kind of investments that engender this? Are we creating the enabling environment to attract these big investors or even big companies to see Nigeria as a home that it can begin to manufacture these equipments for the Nigerian market and even the broader West African market? And if they are not saying yes to Nigeria, why are they not saying yes? So that's stakeholder engagement, because everybody wants to increase their market share. Everybody wants a return on their investment. Nobody wants to get their monies and not get meaningful returns for their investment. So the question is, how can Nigeria position to be that country of choice, to be that partner of choice to these multinationals, where they're able to come in, set up these factories, set up these institutions, set up these industries, and we all can collectively build a Nigeria of our future. So if we don't have answers to these questions, or if we're not even thinking in this direction, then the government must immediately begin to think in this direction, because 2050 is just a few years away, 24 years away. So we must be able to have this sort of conversations, bring in our Minister of Trade, bring in our Minister of Power, Minister of Finance, bring in our foreign partners, the World Bank, the AFDB, the relevant stakeholders, like how the World Trade Organization, how can we ensure that this country, there's certain policies we need to set in place? How can we operationalize the AFCFTA, that's the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement? how can it just position Nigeria as that hub? Because China didn't just get there by happenstance. There was a deliberate effort by the government to ensure that the country did what it had to do to arrive at where it is today. So we, Nigeria as well, can arrive at that destination. The question is, are we asking the right questions? Are we engaging with the right people? Are we really ready for that sort of transmogrification that we want to see on the ground? I think we'll begin to answer yes to these questions. Do you know what will happen next?
No.
We'll begin to take the relevant actions that allows us to see these things come to fruition.
Okay. I'd like to follow up with a question on that, right? Developing these policies in Nigeria, and I'll direct it to Basil, right? If Nigeria, and that's because you said, you're politically inclined. So one of the issues we have is you have a government coming with its policies. I want to do this, I want to develop this, and then the new government comes in and says, oh, that was not my agenda. My own is 2030, my own is Vision 3030, my own is Vision 50, Vision 2060. How can there be that continuity, the fluid flow for policies to be able to make long-term impact?
So it's two ways. Sometimes you have to design the policies that enable institutions to come and continue it irrespective of whoever takes federal power. We used to have that before. I don't know if it's still there. We used to have the National Planning Commission. I don't know, maybe in the audience you can correct me if I'm wrong. That is probably under the Ministry of, not probably, it's now under the Ministry of Budget and Planning. And if I'm not mistaken, it's just a fully fledged ministry. There's no commission or institution embedded in it, for that post-continuity. I would like to think that whoever means well for Nigeria that finally gets into federal power in 2027, my first advice would be divorce the National Population Commission away from the Ministry of Budget and Planning. Let that have its own extant laws. So basically a new establishment law that ensures it is the chief planning institution for Nigeria. And what it does is that it has this multi-door open policy where it takes from every single sector. So sector players, this already is a sector environment. The power dialogue by both the Electricity Hub and Next Step Power, they've been doing this for close to 10 years. It's an ecosystem powerhouse on its own. Powerhouses like this and many other powerhouses in many other sectors should be able to enter, embed themselves with that National Planning Commission and allow for that cross-pollination of ideas, policy propositions, and all of that. That also ensures that the other ministries, the other departments, the other agencies are cross-border. And I'm not talking about power alone. Obviously, I'll recontextualize it back to power, but we need to have that infrastructure, that policy infrastructure framework in that institution that ensures no matter what happens, even if we have a military dictator, well, maybe that's an exception, but as far as we have democratic governments successively succeeding each other, there's an institution that is not touched, not to be touched, so that they are able to carry out that policy continuity. Now, another angle would be if this is not possible, then within the existing system, outside of the Ministry of Budget and Planning, of course, every single MDA should have frameworks that allow for policy continuity, regardless of who takes over. So it's one of the two options. It's either you have an overarching institution similar to maybe the central bank, where their own job, everybody knows. Anything planning, budget, even the NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics, will be under them. So they're able to carry out surveys, they're able to provide us data, they're able to forecast into the future. Our 30-year plan, 50-year plan, 70-year plan, that institution is in charge of it. And then whatever policy propositions that become laws, like the Electricity Act, for instance, they are now embedded in that institution to allow for continuity. I think either of these policy engineering steps really fix this particular concern.
Oh, thank you very much for that. Okay, Achenyo. You worked across hydropower, oil and gas, and renewables. I know you've already touched on it, so maybe 1 sentence, 2 sentence wrap up. How can Nigeria create a more coherent regulatory framework that enables these different energy sources to complement rather than compete with each other?
Okay, interesting question. I just want to say something quickly about what
Yeah.
David said on a lighter note. How you asked the question on how individuals, like everyone, can manage their costs. If you've been moved to band A, you will manage your cost.
By force.
By force. If you're like me, you're on B and you're now on A, nobody will tell you to put off your
Yes.
your AC. You know, I've forgotten I put on my AC, went out, and he just called the security man to turn the whole thing down. Like, just put off the whole thing, disconnect me from the light. But that's one. And then the second thing is that what is so funny is, and Basil is the data guy. I don't know the complete figure. The truth is, solar imports have been way higher, I think, last year into the first quarter of this year. So
Yeah.
as much as we're saying that people can't afford it, how come it's coming in? People are using it. I just wanted to put that out there as food for thought.
Yeah.
That's
Gigawatt now, import level. for
you
solar.
can
Wow.
you can see
1
that.
gigawatt.
Wow, 1 gigawatt.
Yeah. So
You can
September
imagine.
2025.
So
Wow.
quantify that in money terms commercially. Okay, but to your question, I don't think they are competing.
Okay.
I don't think any of these frameworks are competing. We have one major framework, which which is the Electricity Act. And the Electricity Act covers for, like I said, it looks at states, it looks at national, it covers energy theft, like David was mentioning. It's looking at mini grid developers like us, renewable energy sources.
Yeah.
And so I won't say renewable energy is competing with gas thermal. If you look at it, even what is on grid now, there's some sort of hydro, 20 to 25% is from hydro. So you see that there's renewable in there. Renewable is not just solar. There's wind, there's
Biogas.
biogas,
Biogas.
there's wind energy, hydro, everything is encompassing. So what I would say is, again, I know I'm beginning to sound like a broken record. Your broken record is the light should be on. But my record is, we have a framework. Let us implement and do the work. Let us implement it. Let us give the powers to who require the powers to make the changes. Like, he brought a fantastic idea. I never thought about it like
Yeah,
that.
it's really.
But if we have a planning commission, anyway, that's in the future. Let me stick to, I'm not a politician like he is, so let's stick to.
That would be my first bill when I get it.
It would be good.
If you look at it, you'd see that for we in renewables like solar,
Yeah.
you see that even, take for instance, NEC, with the new mini grid regulations, you're trying to increase isolated mini grids up to 5 megawatts, and then interconnected mini grids up to 10 megawatts. Before, it wasn't like that, but you're understanding that there's a need, that energy is not just a power issue, it's an economic issue. People
Yes.
need this power for us to produce, for us to make this country work. So what can we do? There was also a regulation, the net billing regulation, that they're still working on it, but basically, do I explain that? You understand that?
Yeah.
The net billing regulation is something like, I have power and I can put back on the
Net metering.
net metering.
Yes.
So we have that regulation that is still being considered.
Yeah.
This goes to show that the regulators themselves understand the need for distributed energy
Solutions.
resources and solutions. So that's what we're looking at. I wouldn't say that it's competing with, it's not competing. Once we start looking at it like that, then we're doomed to fail. But if we look at it like we're complementing, where the grid can't go, we go there. And where the grid does not provide enough, we help complement that power.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at it. Again, there's just one regulatory framework, which is mainly the Electricity Act. Everything else, is just like appendages that support the execution of the Electricity Act.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that spot on honesty. So, looking at what we are having now, Dangote is in Nigeria, he's supposed to be producing, we're exporting fuel, and yet for every markup there, we have a markup here. We will think as Nigerians, so I'm speaking for Nigerians now, that we should have it better since we are the producers. Is there something that can be done to hedge this, direct effects on Nigerians?
Two things actually.
Yeah.
One is controversial, one is not controversial. Okay. So I will start with the non-controversial. The exposure of Dangote Refinery's feedstock to the Naira when it comes to pricing is just 40%. Okay. I don't know what the full number is in terms of the feedstock he gets from Nigeria's crude, but what I do know is that 40% of the feedstock crude is priced on the Naira, Naira denominated. So it doesn't really have exposure to the international pricing mechanism. So the remaining 60% obviously is external, which means whatever happens, we're not insulated. Since that refinery is responsible, the last that I checked, for 84% of downstream petroleum products, especially PMS, everywhere in the country. So if we can expand that to maybe north of 50%, maybe 60%, I'm not sure Nigeria currently has the capacity to do 80%, because I'm not sure Nigeria has the capacity to supply 80% of the feedstock for Dangote refinery. That's why he's having to buy elsewhere, American crude from Angola and whatever. Sometimes, in fact, we even read a report last night that sometimes they buy Nigerian crude that was sold to the market. You rebuy it again. Right? Depends on how you look at it. So probably and this is a non-controversial issue, just expand that Naira pricing mechanism so that insulates us. It's not exposed to the dollar volatilities. Then the controversial part, which I think is the responsibility of the government, and if you look at the math, at current rates, we're currently doing $106 per barrel, right? Brent crude. According to forecasts, this will be expanded to 135 by June, because Trump doesn't want to end the war. He wants to end the war, but he doesn't want to end the war while ensuring that their major aim for getting into the war was to get Iran out of control of the Strait of Hormuz. So it's basically, sorry to use the word useless, because he fought the war, caused all this chaos, and he's now left the world to now find diplomatic means of getting Iran to please open the door in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's very geo-economically strategic, the Strait of Hormuz. It's responsible for 20% of our hydrocarbon logistics globally. And you know that right now, when it comes to hydrocarbons or any form of energy, it is very global. So whatever happens to the pricing mechanism, it affects everybody. So imagine pausing the war, leaving, and you've not solved the actual problem that is causing all of these price hikes. That's the issue. So if he leaves, according to the forecast by JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, we're going to have extended and heightened global Brent crude prices at $135 per barrel by June. So if I use that particular projection and I extrapolate it with the Nigerian numbers, we're currently doing 1.3 million barrels per day. I'm hoping that number can be improved to 1.4 by June. So if you look at all of those, if I bring all the computations of the variables together, Nigeria should ideally be doing, for the next 4 months, we'll be doing 2.75 trillion Naira every month in terms of earnings. Now, we all know that that's not going directly to our coffers, because we already do 14 to 15% yearly of those amounts of crude that we're producing for servicing debts. A lot of crude for credit facilities have been embedded mostly by the NMPCL. So that has to cover for it. Outside of that, there are other debt services that we need to do with the money that is being accrued from crude exports. Outside of that, we have some capex and some redundancies, some recurrent. So if you do all of that computation, how much is actually left? But I did the math. If we do, and this is the controversial part, if the government reintroduces a temporary subsidy on PMS, Agro, which is diesel, LPG, and jet fuel, because these are the four most economic downstream petroleum products in Nigeria right now. If we do a subsidy till at least pre-Iran war numbers, so pre-Iran war numbers are 820 naira per liter for PMS, right? 1,200 naira per liter for diesel, 1,200 naira or 300 naira per liter for jet fuel. LPG, if I'm not mistaken, LPG is maybe 800 naira per kg.
It's a little higher.
That before the Iran war.
Okay, before, okay.
Yeah, before
yes.
the Iran war, I think it should be 800, 900 naira per kg. So if we introduce that, and the sole reason why we're doing this is so that the government of the day don't lose the election next year. Because as it is right now, I'm sorry to bring that political component. As it is right now, if we continue this till October, Nigerians are going to be tired. It's just not possible. And if there's price resistance, remember, if $135 per barrel becomes a possibility by June, based on the Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan projections, it basically means we'll break the price resistance of 1,500 naira per liter for PMS. And we've already broken the resistance of 2,000 naira per liter for diesel, right? So people will be buying diesel, all of the SMEs, all of the big industry players will be buying diesel at 2,500 naira per liter. We'll be buying PMS at 1,000 naira. In economics, in pure economic, classical economic textbook term, that is what they call purchasing power destruction, complete decimation. Nobody is going to want to do anything apart from buying food. We will stop coming to work. That is how bad the situation will be, because we don't even have the buffers. Where are the public mass transit systems to convey people from one point to the other? Abuja, as it is, doesn't have a public transportation system. Lagos maybe has some, but they have just about 600 BRT buses. The other SACs and buses that are excused as buses are not even up to 3,000 in units. That's not enough for some sources say 17 million people, some sources say 20 million, some sources say 50 million. It's just not enough. So if I bring all of this computation, there has to be something as drastic as the temporary subsidies. And the temporary subsidies sunset in policy lingo or terms. A sunset is basically saying this is when it ends. It ends when the war ends. That's all. We're not saying it's going to, we're going back to the subsidy days. No, temporarily put those numbers there for pre-Iran war. And the computation comes to 544 billion naira every month. Now, I'm thinking if with the variable projections I made earlier, 2.47, if you remove that 15%, that's 2.1 trillion. If you remove the other things like current expenditure, capital, debt servicing, you will still have a sizable 1.4 trillion every month. And if the bill for a temporary subsidy monthly is 544, well, Benny, do it. At the end of the day, what you're doing is you're saving the country from going into chaos. You're also ensuring that consumption doesn't end, right? Non-autonomous consumption, particularly, because autonomous consumption would be people will still have to eat whether they like it or not. So that will always continue. But if your non-autonomous consumption is at zero level, that is crisis, that is stagflation and recession at the same time. I don't think that is the price stability that CBN has been mandated to ensure. I don't think that is the social cohesion and social stability that the federal government is constitutionally mandated to perform or exert as their duty. So this is the controversial contribution in that regard for a hedge. Non-controversial will be to go the commercial way with Dangote Refinery, but I don't see how far that can go.
Wow. Thank you. That's really loaded.
So you see, I covered the parts where analysts who don't like the idea of subsidies will want to criticize. I did the homework for them, did the math and everything. So they should come at me with more superior data. I'm ready for them.
Right. So you're mentioning that, with the way things are, how can we as a nation now, let's stay with it, right? You have increasingly, I'm beginning to see cars on the road with different sign languages, Chinese vehicles, I mean, that are electric vehicles. And so there's an increased interest in, e-mobility, transport solutions. So how how do you see these intersecting with Nigerians' current challenges? And is the infrastructure ready to support it?
Thank you so much for this question. I like the idea that we are adopting EVs in the country. It's in itself a great solution, but still places a lot of strain on our energy infrastructure. Because you ask yourself, EVs need to be charged anyways.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do you charge these EVs? Two things. Every EV comes with its own charger, but that charger needs to be plugged to something, powered by something. It's either you have your independent solar solution at home, or you use the grid. When the grid is not reliable, you use your generator if you don't have a clean energy alternative. And now we ask ourselves, are we solving the problem of e-mobility that way? So that's a question I have there. But I would say that when we think about this challenge of or the opportunity we have with e-mobility, right? In itself, it provides an opportunity for us to think things differently. Can we use, with our current situation where we are with struggling electricity infrastructure, can we really just create a market out of it? Yes. One, there are specific things that we can begin to do. Are there ways that we can cluster charging solution or charging stations? So for example, in typical places where you have a lot of people go to, or where there are a lot of clusters, where there are a lot of people who use this sort of technology, offices, parks, public areas, we can have some public interfacing charging stations so that everybody in itself is not a charger, but you can have shared charging. That is one. Two, we may not be able to get EVs because most of the EVs we see in the country are still personally owned vehicles. Not so many of them are mass transit solutions. We have in Abuja, where the government has taken the initiative to get some buses that tend to plow certain routes, that has a lot of traffic, like from the airport to the city center. And guess what? It doesn't just end there at the city center. They also have smaller vehicles while they use electric buses to convey you to and fro that location in the heart of town to the airport and back. They also have electric vehicles that can convey you from that hub to some other locations. So it is really commendable. But the question is, we need this at scale because we honestly need a sustainable mass transit solution in the country, especially in Abuja, and you don't have that. You go once it's 4:30, 5 o'clock, you go to specific junctions and you see that people are literally looking for anything that moves for them to get home. And the same cycle goes again the next day. And you ask yourself, is this in itself sustainable? The wear and tear on people's bodies trying to jump into a moving vehicle in order for them to get home. Now, note that price in itself is not even a factor here. Availability is what we're talking about. So I would say that while there is a huge opportunity with EVs, you say you're seeing different vehicles with different writings. Yes. China is leading the market, also not just because of the effectiveness of the technology, but it's also a price thing. You would ask yourself, why don't we have more non-Chinese brands in the EV space today than other contemporaries that are based in Europe or even American brands? The truth is, there's still a price factor that makes that Chinese market, electric vehicle market supreme, in addition to effective service delivery. So I would say that we can have a phased adoption. One, we need to look at shared charging infrastructure within certain clusters. We can start with campuses where there are a lot of people that need to commute from one place to another. We can start with estates, we can start with popular corridors where there's mass transiting happening. We can deploy the solutions there and have some shared charging infrastructure, because that in itself is where you're going to really see a lot of impact, where people are going to say, wow, I was able to go from at least the closest bus stop to my house to very close to my workplace without having to really struggle a lot. And so that's one thing that we need to prioritize. While we also think of more long-term solutions around ensuring that there is higher adoption of this technology that could phase out some of the vehicles. And again, let us also look at the health benefits. Zero carbon emissions, less noise pollutions. There's a way that your combustion engine of the vehicle would sound, that this car is not supposed to be on the road anymore. So some of these things also have a very negative health impact. So also, if you discover most of the cars that are coming in are newer models, even when it comes to the EVs. And so what does that mean? Naturally, if you're driving and you're just seeing an EV, it looks really nice to see. There are some vehicles today that when you see them, this is a particular part of Western Nigeria. You know that this can only be found in the shores of the country, and it should not be. And again, allow me to say that even when it comes to car manufacturing, these machines are becoming much more efficient, even in fuel consumption. Now you have vehicle companies that are producing hybrid vehicles that have both combustion engines and electric capabilities as well. So with all of these things, the market is evolving. We need to see how well we can phase out some of these vehicles. There are certain countries, even within Africa today, that if you're bringing in a car that is less, you can't even bring in a car that is older than 5 years. So that has a model lower than 5 years. They won't even allow it into their country. So when 2026, if you bring in you can't even bring in a 2020 model. It has to be 2021 and above, even in Africa. So we need to look at ourselves. What we say, it's fine. Pardon the parlance, Tokumbo cars are cheaper. It's fine to bring. No, there are so many opportunities that come with adopting EVs. Also, it comes with its own strain on the grid infrastructure because they need to be charged. But are you saying that we should not bring in EVs at all? No, there's an opportunity that they can play, especially in having a mass outreach on those who need to commute day to day, week to week, month on month from point A to point B. But also looking at it more long term, that we need to look at those certain infrastructures that we can set in place at key locations that can have a shared benefit, where you can go into a mall and while you're doing your shopping, you're charging your vehicle. We already even have that today, for example, in the city of Abuja, where if you go to the Jabi Lake Mall and you want to charge your electric vehicle, there's a shared charging station there. So some of these models are already operating. If you go to somewhere around Victoria, I think around Marina, just opposite the Sterling Bank HQ, there's a shared EV charging station there. And Sterling Bank has done a great job in also showing that this is possible through different initiatives that they have done. And a couple other partners have come on stream to say, hey, this is possible. So rather than having that independent solution, I think it's just best that we begin to see how that community use of this infrastructure that has a shared benefit for us all and also reduces the financial burden of owning it yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, but let me just add something to what David's saying. I'm all about impact stories, right? And so I think that our communities that we work, we guarantee at least 16 to 20 hours of power, which is much better if you look at it than what people have here. But there's something else we've also introduced, which is the EVs, right? And it's because transportation too is difficult there in the rural communities as well. So even access to getting stations to buy the fuel and all of that, contribute. So what we do, or what we have is we have these EVs like bikes, and there are EVs like tricycles too. But we have these EVs like bikes. We have our charging stations where you come and you can do a battery swap. So trying to, alleviate, that the stress.
The stress on
Yes,
transport.
on transport, and provide that energy access. You can easily come there, swap the battery. You don't even need to wait to charge it a bit. You swap it,
Battery
come
swapping
back. Yes,
technology.
battery swapping. You know,
Yeah.
you know these things. So basically, I just wanted to share that yes, there are all these concerns, but in fact, it's a bit much more. It's easier in rural areas, like you said. The energy theft is higher
In the city.
in the city than in the
Yes.
rural areas, maybe because they have an understanding what this power, does for them, So that's just what I wanted to put out there.
And just speaking about that, right? There's a lot of impact that comes with it, the jobs that are being created. The fact that somebody can just earn a living just running and managing a battery swapping station, a battery charging station, also the fleet management, So being able to also ensure that the best approach is not to target it from an individual basis, but those who manage fleets, those who do some sort of mass transportation. I think that is one way in order for us to see very meaningful impact, And just like you rightly mentioned, it's not really restricted to just four-wheelers. Two-wheelers are not left out of this. Three-wheelers are not left out of this. When I say three-wheelers, for those who don't understand what I mean by three-wheelers, our typical keke napep, or tricycle, like we like to call it here, or our Okadas are not left out of it, And guess what? When you look at the price point of what an electric tricycle is, compare it to your typical fuel-powered tricycle, you see that the cost in itself is not so, the difference is not so outrageous. Even down to your EVs, even electric vehicles today, compared to the typical vehicles with combustion engines, fuel-powered or diesel-powered. Because yes, there are vehicles there are cars that are also powered by diesels. You also see that the price point, and you also have the aesthetics and a couple other things that makes the EV look more exciting for your roads. But I was told, someone cracked a joke recently that have the EV seen the flooding that happens in some of our Lagos roads? But that's a conversation for another day.
Honestly. Thank you so much. But I'm wondering, as a stakeholder that is listening on this right now and is hearing this conversation about e-mobility and possibility of places where he or she can play in, right? I don't know if there are any, hidden issues, policy issues that might come up for such a person to be a hindrance to such a person. Yeah.
Yes, there are a number of things to look out for. In as much as we may talk about how nice the technology is, it needs the right kind of roads. It needs the right kind of infrastructure to be in place. So there's not just only electricity infrastructure that needs to be in place for EVs to thrive. They need to go on well-paved roads. They need to also ensure that these roads are in a way and manner that it's very easy for them to thrive, and just like we also need to locate these stations at these swapping or charging stations at very close proximities. You ask yourself today that if you go on the road and you want to buy a petrol station, sometimes you want to buy petrol for your vehicle, you are guaranteed that if you're going on a stretch of, say, a 2-3 kilometer road, you are likely to see a number of petrol stations. This in itself still hinders the adoption of electric vehicles, because what happens when you can't easily get swapping? It tends to impact on the mindset of people, right? That this technology in itself is foolproof. And that can also impact even its adoption, because someone knows that if I'm going on a 400-kilometer journey, 500-kilometer journey, I'm certain that along the way, I wouldn't be stranded if I'm using an EV, right?
Yes.
And there's not a lot of thinking into the technology. And we just really need to educate people, educate stakeholders. People need to be aware. Consumers need to be aware of the possibilities of this technology, or they need to be aware of the potential that this technology holds. They need to be aware of the challenges that exist, because there's no technology that doesn't have its own challenge. But when if you try to start your normal vehicle or your normal petrol-powered vehicle in the morning and it doesn't start, to say, okay, the first thing, let me check the battery head. Let me check whether there's almost, you're able to almost perform your own first aid to see that, I think I've tried what I need to do before you now call the professional, your mechanic, and say, see, this thing is not giving me it's not starting. But if people also are educated on the fact that some of these things, you can literally have an EV and go to sleep, then it begins to educate people's mind, like, why not try this technology? Because again, sometimes because something is new, you may get that hesitance.
Yes.
I give you a practical example. Even in communities where you may deploy your mini grids, there are people who would typically have come on the solution, like, oh, pay their connection fee and get connected. But you may see them as doubting Thomases. They want to see that their neighbor has had light for a while. They want to see that the solutions have not failed. I'm sure that has been some of the experiences that
Okay.
yeah, because what? So people would say, oh, you have come with your own advocacy, sensitization. You have explained that this thing works. You have tried whatever, but people would not still get hooked on the technology. Why? Because it's not what they are used to. So there's still a lot of that hand-holding, that stakeholder engagement, and sometimes you need to run multiple pilots, that serve as practical solutions that educate the mind, because what you're dealing with there is the decision of that person to switch from option what he's used to what he can start using. And so some of those things, so effective communication on the challenges and also the opportunities that come with the solution, relevant infrastructure that needs to be in place beyond just the grid and also all our government infrastructure, relevant stakeholder engagement that ensures that those who are playing in this market are properly catered for, and the government wants to engage and ensure that they have a meaningful place to thrive, and also ensuring that we see how can local content contribute to this. Now we are saying Chinese vehicles. Are we saying that the likes of Innosim, Coast Cherries, these are companies that are already playing within the country today in these sectors? Are we saying that we cannot have more household names within that are providing this service within the country? I believe that we can. So in everything that we're doing, I think we also need to think local content. How can Nigerians produce solutions that can help Nigerians meet their demands or meet their needs, and also have market value and market acceptance to meet other markets? I think those are the things that we really need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Just one more question before we begin to ask questions from our audience. It's just one thing about, the rural community at Chenyo. There are places where we have seen over time that they go into the DARE program, they start a mini grid and they don't complete it. Some are abandoned. And I'm wondering why, where did we miss it? From a coordination and compliance perspective, right? What are the key risks that, affect these things from coming into fruition, like, completely?
Okay, so first of all, the DARE's intervention program is very ambitious. It's a very ambitious program that seeks to provide power, right? I won't say that particular intervention has the issues that you're mentioning now, because they've learned from the NEP. There was an NEP program before then. Yeah. And so from the lessons learned there, you see that with this particular intervention, there's more, again, I'll refer to Basil again, there's a lot of more, data coordination. So you have a platform, you have better ways for verification of your connections, you have stages, you have milestones you must fill if you want to get that, what do you call it? The money, if you want to access that funding. So there are certain things that you would, you would fulfill.
Yes.
But I think that there are other interventions. So I won't necessarily speak about the DARE's intervention, because like I said, you've done a fantastic job. Yeah. But for other interventions, it would probably be enforcement, compliance. How are you checking what the developers are doing? I see that DES, for instance, has insisted that if you're going to build a mini grid, you should have your OEMs on ground.
Yeah.
So that if a part is, missing or is broken down and all, it's easy to replace. But other interventions may not have that sort of enforcement and compliance. So you have to check, tick your boxes, cross your T's, dot your I's?
Yes.
So I would say that currently now, developers are finishing their projects. That's what I would tell you. The developers go into a community and they build. And it's not like before where, well, I can speak for us. We don't abandon what we've put in a lot of capital for.
Yeah.
Yes, CapEx is there, OpEx is continuous. So I'm trying to find a way to properly answer, get the answer for this question. But basically, all in a nutshell is currently what we have on ground are that the interventions are working with regards to compliance. Yes, that I can say with regards to compliance. However, there are some that there's a need for enforcement. There's a need to ensure that people are not encroaching or there are no political interests, right?
Yeah.
That may be applicable to, a few other interventions that I would, not name. But currently for theirs, I think they're doing a great job in terms of, like, at the end of the day, you have your API integration. I
Yes.
think people will understand that better than I do. You have your meters integrated onto the platform. So you're seeing that whatever is there is what what's the word, Basil? For those people who check these things, the data, maybe data controller.
Real time?
Yes,
Real
in real
time.
time. In real time. Everything has to be in real time because if not, someone can fake it. That's why
Yes.
you have to use smart meters. That's why you have to, update your milestones. If not, you're not going to get that funding. So I think based on the lessons they learned from the NEP program, they've tried to make this much, much better and streamlined.
Thank you so much. I've really been enjoying this discussion, and I'm sure the same goes for our audience. And I just want us to give each of us just give one last word on how energy cost exposes power sector gaps. Just one last word.
Anyone wants to take it?
Well, my final words or final thoughts on this would be, I know that this conversation, we can't really exhaust it, right? Because everyone is feeling the heat. And a large majority of those feeling the heat are people who would typically wish to have the capacity to pay. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. So I would say that it's important for us to always look at it from both ways. We need to be able to ensure that people see this as a market, and government sees its people as the first line customers that will patronize that market. And two things. How can we ensure that those who are doing business within this sector are well incentivized to provide that service? And how can we ensure that electrons being provided are reliable, are sustainable, are affordable, to ensure that that customer can plan its livelihood and productivity around it? Thank you. Having electricity is not a nice to have. You deploy electricity in a way and manner that improves how people earn. And that is the lifeblood of this sector. People don't have electricity. People don't just consume electricity for the fun of it. We must at all points be able to clearly communicate why we need to be able to ensure that we think about the commodity from a point where people, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. We must be able to think about it from a point where people are, how do we provide this commodity in a way and manner that improves lives and livelihoods by impacting directly productivity?
Yeah.
And every time that there's a lack of electricity, we should see it as not just something that is, we should see it as something that impacts on the way and manner that people earn and live their lives. And hence, that sense of urgency should be given to that commodity. And we must be able to balance both worlds, service providers and service consumers. Because when we're able to do, it's not an easy task, but when we're able to look at it from both points of view, being able to incentivize both parties, I'm sure that we're going to be on a path, to progress within the sector. But this, I've said, is not an easy task. Constant coordination, constant engagement, conduct communication, stakeholder engagement, relevant policies, government intervention, and government, not just government intervention, but government participation with the citizens, with a citizen's perspective in mind. I think it's very critical for us to look at. So that's what I would say. Government, there's no silver bullet. We would keep on reiterating. We did some iterations some 10 years ago, some 20 years ago. We're now at a phase where there's still going to be additional iteration, but we need to keep at it, looking at what is working, strengthening it, what is not working, how can we get it out of the way and improve things going forward. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Well, he has said basically everything, but let me start first by saying thank you so much that I am on this panel. I've attended at the Galleria, but I never believed that I would be here. So thank you so much to HOSC for saying you must show. And thank you very much. So he's basically said it, better communication, stakeholder engagement. If you look at it, energy costs, there's the diesel usage, there's the downtime from your equipment, from both power on the grid and also from the diesel generators that you're using, the DGs. And then there's inefficiency. These are three things that are affecting households and affecting businesses.
Yeah.
And then again, back to regulations and regulatory frameworks. We have to ensure that these things are not just written for show. How are you implementing them? How are you making it easy for people? I heard that, I read that the Ministry of Power apologizing for this downtime of the grid, said they were, undergoing compliance on, I'm sure you would know, is it DSO for the reserves, for gas, to see what has happened to it. We don't know, but these are the conversations that we need to have. Right? Do Nigerians even know that we have those gas reserves that we can pull out from? Do we have that sensitization? Do we know that these are our rights to know as Nigerians? So this is another thing, building up from what he said in terms of stakeholder engagement, telling them why, not just, saying there's no power on the grid to deal, but this is why, and this is what we're doing, to curtail it. Then another thing with regulatory framework, I just have to say this, is for sex and for states, we need to have that unified system there, and we need to have sort of like stabilization frameworks in place, so that I know that if I'm going into different states as an investor, I know that my projects, it's to ensure that if a government changes or something happens, my assets that I've deployed there are still safe. It's not the wind tosses it here and there. Something changes in government, and then everything I have, will go back to square one again. So like he also mentioned, you need to have that, if possible, have one planning commission, right? But that's long term. But in the short term, the regulatory frameworks that we already have, let us not just have them, let us implement them. It's good stuff in there. Implement and enforce.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Basil.
Yeah, they have said everything, in all honesty. I think what I'll just reiterate now is to the governance actors, both from the federal government as well as the 36 state governments and the Federal Ministry of FCT, to be more particular about scaling up implementation of the Electricity Act, and to also understand that this particular geopolitical crisis that has cascaded into this energy crisis that we're going through is a generational stress test on our validity as a country, as a society, and as a civilization. And let us not allow this to happen again, because whether we like it or not, exogenous shocks will happen again and again. The world is more volatile than it has ever been.
Yeah.
You know, powerful governments are voting more volatile people into those positions, and they're putting us in these positions that we are. I mean, you're all aware that President Trump just wants to abandon the war and go his own way after causing all this chaos. So he's literally going to leave Europe to find diplomatic means and Asia to find diplomatic means to speak some sense of order to Iran. And all of us will suffer for it. So with that volatility, increased volatility in global governance, the responsibility of the state or the nation state that Nigeria is to make sure that all of the vulnerabilities that has been exposed because of this are fixed. Because when this happens again, they will still go back to this same old place. And I don't want a situation where 20 years from now, with my gray hair, I will still be complaining about this.
Same
It
thing.
would be terrible. And that's why I'm running for public office, so that I can try and fix it. It's the truth. So we need to understand that this is a generational stress test, and there are a few low-hanging fruits that the federal government of Nigeria particularly can set the ball rolling for, while the states follow up with the upscaled implementation of the Electricity Act. And I end by saying that those particular low-hanging fruits for the federal government starts with a strategic oil reserve. We don't have a strategic oil reserve. We're probably the biggest oil producers on the planet that do not have a singular strategic oil reserve. For those that do not know, just a reserve of crude supplies that you can fall back to maybe in a day, 2 days, or in 3 days, or 1 month, or 1 year. Or we don't have. There are countries that have up to 1 year of strategic oil reserves. We should build that. At least let's start with 1 month, so that whatever happens, if there's an exogenous shock like this 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we know that we have buffers outside of the international price mechanism that will still give us that level of price stability. And then the government figures out what to do for month 2, month 3, and month 4. So strategic oil reserves are a responsibility of the federal government of Nigeria. They should set the ball rolling for that execution. Every other thing, the liquidity issues, they will find their way and sort that situation. But for me, strategic oil reserves would do that. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it will help the ongoing reforms in the power sector to be smoother. Because right now, there's a lot of stress testing on our grid. You know, it's affecting all of the speed of execution in the electricity sector. So oil reserves, 2 months, 3 months, if possible, 6 months. I think for me, my ideal situation is 6 months.
Right.
Helps whatever reforms that we're having in the power sector to continue to speed up. And
Okay.
I'm hoping that this will be a different conversation the next time an exogenous shock happens.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, I would like to plead that we would have questions that our audience needs to ask, and please we'll send it to you so that you could, within your earliest convenience, reply. I don't want us to stay any more longer. It's already 7:36, so please and please, when we have these questions across, please. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much. I have learned a lot, and I can say same for the audience. And have a good evening. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.